Welcome. And if you ever would like to join us actually on Zoom, you'd certainly be welcome. And we start at 7:30 Pacific time. That's the time we start in the morning. So if you think you're up and bright and early and would like to be with us, we'd love to have you. So with this, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen and then make the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you. So on the main, during the week, of course, we are now starting a next book, the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. But as we've said on Sunday mornings, we're going to just keep going where we left off in Genesis. So we're all the way back in chapter 1 of Genesis, and we're on to the fourth day. And so we'll start right here. Vayomer Elohim, God said, Yehi me'orot, let there be luminaries. It's from the word or, you can see. And me'orot is a hifil form, I believe. At least it means cause, something that causes light. Causes light. Rakia, in the Rakia, remember we talked about the creation of the Rakia on the second day, and that's that it's the vault of heaven, this film, this thin film that's in between the upper waters and the lower waters, Birkia Hashamayim, in the vault of heaven, Lahavdil, in order to separate Bein Hayom, between day, Uvein Halayla, and between the night, Vahayu la'otot, and the purpose of these luminaries, interestingly enough, is they shall be for signs. And exactly what we mean by signs, I can tell you right now, is certainly feels like a Babylonian influence, because the reason why the Babylonians were quite good astronomers, they really were very careful about documenting the seasons and when they occurred and the regularity of them and the exact length of the lunar month, etc., and the solar year had to do because they believed in astrology. And that is this implication here. They shall be for signs. Ulamoadim, and for festivals is how we would translate that. But it comes from a word ya'ad, which means to gather together. In other words, times for assembly. And I actually love the translation of appointments. In other words, you can look at our festivals as being appointments with God. They're time. What's an appointment, if you think about it? It's a time that you designate for a particular activity. And so our festivals are also times to designate for a specific activity. And that's what's bound up in this word mo'ed, that we're asked to come together, to set aside a time, and to make this appointment with the divine. So they should also indicate a time for these appointments, ulayamim, and for the days, uveshanim, and for years. So the length of the day is depending on when the sun rises and the sun sets, but we are not talking here, as you notice, necessarily that they're there for daylight. So even though I'm sure they were aware that the sun gave off light, nevertheless, their creation here on the fourth day has more to do with these reasons that we've just given in this particular verse. Let's take a look at the Rashi. Yehi ma'orot, etc. And Rashi explains, because there is the obvious question that bounces out right away, which is about the fact that how did you have a day when the sun, moon, and stars aren't created until the fourth day? And it's still a profound question. Here we go. So, Miyon Rishon Nivra'u. They were actually created on the first day. So whether or not, what does Rashi exactly mean, or what are the implications of what Rashi is saying here? Is he saying that they also gave off light? All right, but you'll see. And we also know, you may recollect, that light of the first day was taken away and hidden away for the next life that we have, for the tzaddikim, that one has to use this life to merit that kind of light when we pass on to the next world. And that's where it was, because God didn't want the wicked to benefit from that light of the first day. So at any rate, we're talking about the fact that these items, that is the sun, the moon, and the stars, were all there on the first day. And I'll keep going, and then I want to just talk a little bit, because I was thinking carefully about this first day and its significance. Uva Ravi'i, but on the fourth day, Tziva Alehem, he commanded regarding them, Lehatlot Berkia, to be hung, suspended in the firmament. V'chein, and he goes on to tell us, V'chein kol dodot toldot shamayim va'aretz. And in fact, this applies to all the various creations that came out through the course of these 7 days. They actually were all there at the very, very beginning, on that first moment. So that's how I'm understanding this first day is really, really significant, because it's a moment when there is nothing, and then, or at least I can't say nothing, right? Because the Aretz was tohu vavohu. There was this blended something or other out there. And the process of creation, we understand, is more a separation and a distinction and a clarification, etc., etc. At any rate, they all were created b'yom rishon. They were all created on the first day. V'chol echad ve'echad, and each one of these things, nikba, was apportioned, it was designated, b'yom shenigzar alav, regarding the day, the particular day when it was commanded to do it. So that's also an interesting thing, right? In other words, it gives us something to think about the nature of divine commandment and how that operates. And again, that word is there to help us understand our relationship to the divine, to have that sense of what is it exactly that's involved in creating a spiritual relationship. And it occurs to me that that's also another reason why the Torah uses the word Elohim. So it just occurred to me relatively recently that, and I've mentioned this before, but I think it's worth repeating, that the reason we say 2 words, Adonai and Eloheinu, we don't say in the Shema, we say Adonai Eloheinu, we don't simply say Adonai Elohim. Because, and this is all helpful from the definition of Elohim referring to God as judge. So because a judge is directly involved in the cases that judge has to adjudicate. And when we talk about Eloheinu, we're talking about stage 2. Stage 1 is simply the willingness to accept the idea of a divine creator, of something transcendent to reality, that there's something beyond reality that allows it all to come into existence, or that is
Rabbi,
Yeah.
could you start that sentence again, because the beginning of that sentence was garbled?
Which sentence are we talking about? About
You're
Eloheinu?
in the middle of.
Okay, so I'm saying,
You
okay, all right. So I'm saying that in the Shema, when we say Adonai Eloheinu, we're actually talking about 2 stages. The first stage is the Adonai, and that is simply the willingness or the ability to understand that there is a transcendent level of existence, that there is this divine existent one that made the world, that allowed the world to come into existence. And that took place on that first day. But that's just stage 1. That's the first part of being open and willing to understand. And I'm saying willing because a lot of it has to do with how you feel about it. and all the implications of saying or believing that there is something transcendent, because basically it's saying that if I'm thinking, if I'm capable of thinking, or if human beings are capable of thinking, it's because this transcendent level made it possible. Or all the miraculous, or seeing the various elements of nature, right? The hundreds of thousands of elements of nature as actually being something that has a level of existence that allows it to come into existence. And that's part. And then when we say "Hamachadesh b'chol yom tamid maaseh bereshit" in that bracha before the Shema in the morning service, who says, it says, who renews creation every day, to understand that that's part of what's going on, that we live in this dynamic world, which is only exists because this transcendent level is bringing it into existence, or allowing it to, or sustaining it, I would say. But that's not necessarily Eloheinu. Eloheinu is the part where we say that we're willing to be commanded by this transcendent existence. So the Eloheinu has to do directly with the relationship that God has with God's creation. And that's a second stage, because you can absolutely believe in a divine, you can, in other words, it's partly of being a deist, right? A deist believes that the world did come into existence because of on a transcendent level, right? But at that point, there's no relationship. Like God is the divine clockmaker, is the metaphor that's sometimes used. He wound up the world and then just let it go. And Eloheinu is not saying that. Eloheinu is saying, no, the fact is that as human beings, we are capable of having a direct relationship. And the way that works is to accept God as being our judge, which also means that God is directly involved and examining every single moment that we have, and that we respond to God as judge through the mitzvot, because the mitzvot say this is the right thing to do, or this isn't the right thing to do, and we're willing to accept that. And that's the second part when we say the Shema and we say Adonai Eloheinu, and that's what we mean. And so I know this is a very roundabout discussion here, or speech on my part, or whatever, but that's one other reason why it says Elohim and doesn't say Adonai. That if it said Adonai, it might imply deism. But the fact that it says Elohim means that Elohim denotes a direct relationship, conscious, constant, sustaining, etc. And that's why the Torah chose the word Elohim in this particular passage, and not Vayomer Adonai, which is a great question. I mean, it's a legitimate question. Why doesn't the Torah use Adonai here? Because that's such a fundamental point of belief in the divine that we won't even pronounce the word to indicate the respect we have. That's why we talk about the ineffable name. It's all part of demonstrating the huge respect and greatness of a transcendent level, of a transcendent divine creator. Anyway, let me go on with this right now. So the point that we were making here is that even though it takes 7 days of creation for the various components to come together, that Rashi's telling us they were all in existence on the first day. And the reason they had a particular day in which to come into existence had to do with divine decree, that God decreed it. And again, in trying to say, apply it to our understanding of the fact that the world took billions of years to develop, we can understand it in that way too. That the very fact that the world took billions of years to develop was ultimately part of a divine plan and divine decree. And Rashi gives a support for this notion. Hu shekatuv, and this is why it says in the text, et hashamayim, right? The word et. Hashamayim, the heavens. And the reason this et, which we don't translate, it indicates a direct object. So basically, we understand et as a utility word, but it also, in rabbinic biblical interpretation, the word et is understood as something that comes to include something else that isn't being specified in that particular text. Because it could have said Bereshit bara Elohim shamayim. It didn't have to use the word et. So why does it say et? And also the fact that et is made up of the first letter of the alphabet and the last letter of the alphabet. So we're understanding that it's including something that isn't stated explicitly in the text. But through the system of interpretation, we understand that it's lerabot, to include, toldotehem. The literally, of course, it means generations, but it means their development. The et haaretz, okay, so in other words, the heavens and all that is involved in the heavens, stars, sun, moon, planets, anything, right? Nebula, that's got to do et hashamayim. So not just the rakia, but everything that's on a celestial level. Ve'et haaretz, and it goes on to say, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, right? So here this word et again, l'rabot toldoteha, to include all that's involved with the earth. Everything, all the specifics. Okay. So yehi me'orot, let there be luminaries. Now Rashi notices that in the text there is no vav here. Me'orot. Notice there are no vavs here. So normally we would expect the word, when we see the word or, so if we went back to the very first, let me do that for you. Okay, I'm going to go all the way back now to the very first creation, which we know was light. Okay, let's see if I can here. Very first act of creation. Let's go back here. Okay, so here's the word or. Do you notice there's a vav there? It's part of the word. Hear the word or again. Word the vav. And yet when it says ma'orot, there is no vav. Okay, let me just go to that. Let me see if I can do this. If it'll work. No, okay. Never mind. Oh, there it is. Just took a little convincing. Okay, let's try this. Okay. So here's the word ma'orot. Things that give off light. And there's no vav there. And there's going to be, again, when the Torah does something like that, one of the foundational premises of biblical interpretation, of traditional biblical interpretation, is there are no coincidences. Nothing happens by chance. The very fact that this is a written text means that the actual way in which it's written and the formulation of the words and how they're written is significant. So that's what Rashi's going to talk about. He says, chaser vav. It's missing a letter vav. Kativ, in other words, it's pronounced as if it has a vav, but it's written without the vav. Okay, that's the kativ. It's written. Al shahu yom me'era. He says it is a day of it's a day that is cursed. It's a day in which there can be a curse. Lipol askara or iskara betinokot. That apparently this is a day when babies develop croup. I mean, that's scientifically provable or not. But for some reason, they feel that Wednesday, the fourth day of the week, is a day in which they must have noticed babies getting croup. Bahu shaninu bo, shaninu, right? And this is something we learn. Shaninu would imply something in the Mishnah or in the Talmud, right? That we learned. Bedalit, that is on Wednesday. Hayu mitanim al iskara. They would fast regarding croup. Iskara is croup. So they would fast to try to pray so that the babies wouldn't develop croup. This is obviously just skirting the surface here. There's a lot more, I think, that requires or that begs further understanding. but I'm just at this point I can only give you the very basis here so that you know it. Shelo tipul b'tinokot, so that the babies wouldn't develop it. They wouldn't develop croup. I'm sure there's more stuff written about it, especially if it's in the Talmud. He's not giving us a reference here, although I suspect we could find a reference, and that I can tell you that the Talmud has so much commentary on it, I would be surprised. But again, how do you want to spend your time? So it's certainly something interesting. I'm going to leave it here because it's time to stop. So give me a moment while I do that. And I'm going to put this in. And next Sunday, we will continue. David, you have a question?
Yeah, so as we went through this, the sun, the moon, the other elements were there on day one, yes. But where's the actual proof behind that? I mean, it's great. I mean, of course, using that fits everything, but that doesn't mean that most of the time we see Rashi gives some proof to what he's stating, and maybe I missed it, but I didn't hear that at all during this discussion. I just heard, oh, okay, it was done on day one. That explains why everything happens this way. Well, okay, but where?
All right.
Can I say something?
Yes,
I'd love to say something about that. Thank you. If Adonai is everything that ever was, is, or ever will be, then wouldn't that have been in the container of everything is on that day, on the first day, that all the raw materials are there? Thank you.
But then the question is, are the sun, the moon, and all that raw materials, or they finished products? They're like, it sounds more like, you gather all the pieces, and then you put them together, I mean, in any construction of anything, right? And it sounds like we've he's just sort of conveniently saying that, hey, we had all the pieces on day one, but there's just no statement or evidence that that's anyway. It doesn't. Okay. That was just my question.
No problem. No problem. Golden, go ahead.
He said "et." That was where that came from, and he did that. That was his explanation, using the words "et hashamayim," the "et haaretz." Et was all things that had to do with whatever that was. Correct? I believe that's what I heard.
That is what you heard. That is correct.
Okay. So that's his interpretation of where all that stuff came from.
Okay. Not only that, I will tell you that we know that there's a second in chapter 2. After the creation of Shabbat, there is another creation story, and you will see that story that everything is basically there, and that the emphasis of that story is man's relationship to the world, and how all this stuff was sort of there, but wasn't put in place because there was no man to till the soil. All right.
Okay. So it's coming up is basically what you're saying.
In addition, but the truth is that the et would have no purpose to it if, in fact, it didn't mean the sky and all involved in it, and the earth and all involved in it. All right. So the fact that it's there in the first, because it could have just said, as I mentioned, it could have just said, Bereshit bara Elohim shamayim va'aretz. It didn't have to say shamayim ve'et haaretz. So that forces a question of, so why? Why does it say it? And the answer that our tradition gives us is and it's consistent, by the way. This is a way of interpretation that is up and down, to say that it includes all the specifics as well. That Shamayim and Aretz is a generality on some levels, and the et is the implied specifications of what's involved when we talk about the heavens and when we talk about the earth. But look, I think what you're asking, if I'm inferring correctly, is the significance of that, and that we're going to find out in the second chapter.
Okay, fair enough.
All right. So
That was the most profound thing I've heard in a long time. That just the et is just so cool.
keep it in the back of your mind, because
Okay.
it's not
I
gonna,
wrote it down. I mean, several places already. I wrote it, I circled it in at
Right.
Bereshit, and then I wrote it on my other page that I was writing stuff on.
right. It is something that will come up from time to time. I'm going to stop the recording. So.